I'm Shoshana Wheeler, and I'll be doing several segments on nonviolent parenting, also known as compassionate parenting. And this is our 5th segment in nonviolent parenting from ProfessorIt.com. In this segment, we're going to be looking at brain development and child development. So in that manual that you didn't get from the hospital when you took home your baby, there would have been a primary section on brain development and child development because it's really critical to have knowledge of these two areas of science to be able to do a very effective job about raising our children. So, I want you to know that brain development is dependent on the connected relationship between the parent and the child. So I'm going to say that again. Brain development is dependent on that connected relationship between the parent and the child. So that empathy, that respect for our children's feelings and for their needs, and that deep attunement that we want to have actually grows your child's brain, and it actually sculpts how their brain looks. So babies are born with about 200 billion brain cells. I mean, that's a phenomenal number. And the brain is about 25% of the size that it's going to be when they'll become adults. And 90% of that brain growth occurs in the first 5 years. And what's happening, how the brain grows, is it actually makes connection from one brain cell to another. And that's how the brain grows, is by making those connections. And the connections occur through our interactions with our children. So the interactions that we have with them literally are creating the brain connections that are so critical. There are 3 parts to the brain. There's the lower part of the brain. We call it the alarm center. Some people call it the reptilian brain. Then there is the middle brain. We call it the emotional center. Some people call it the mammalian brain. And then there is the higher brain, which we call the decision-making center of the brain, and it's used for all of those important decision-making functions. So in the lower part of the brain is where we have the responses of fight, flight, or freeze. So it's a really, really important part of our brain. And when babies are born, this is the part that is primarily developed. The next part of the brain is the middle section of the brain. And if I made a fist with my hand, this would be the lower part of the brain. My thumb in the middle of my brain would be the emotional center, the middle part of my brain. And my fingers folded over would be the upper part of the brain. So the middle part of the brain is all about emotions. And when our children and when we are in an emotional state, we are functioning out of the middle part of our brains. And it is in feelings, feelings, feelings. It's all about feelings in this middle part of the brain. The next part of the brain is the higher brain, or the decision-making center of the brain. And this is this is where reason is housed, rational thought, decision-making, imagination, creativity, problem-solving, and empathy occur, and kindness. So those are all the qualities that come from the higher level thinking part of our brain. We see a large growth spurt in this part of the brain at about age 6, and another growth spurt at about 11 or 12, and then when children become teenagers around 15, we'll see another large growth spurt in the higher brain. The middle brain is growing from birth on, and that's the primary area that's being developed in those early years. The amazing thing about the brain is that it's actually a relational organ. It grows in relationship. So when children live in chaotic, disconnected, or violent households, it actually can affect the wiring in their brain and their brain development. And if we remember hearing about some of those children, those infants and orphans in Romania, their brains were actually smaller because they didn't have those deeply attuned relationships. So that's how important it is to create that really wonderful, nurturing relationship with our children. And frequent experiences and frequent exposure to stress and chaos actually can cause changes in the function and in the structure of the brain. And here's the good news. The brain is a living organ, and it can grow and change and heal at any time. So if you're sitting here worrying if you've already, damaged your children, you don't have to worry about that. If you think of a stroke victim, they actually can regain their speech. So brains are truly amazingly plastic. It's really important to know that development is highly individual. And if you're a parent, you know that, because one child might learn to walk at 10 months and the other might not walk until 12 months. So it's really, really highly individual, and we want to really honor each child for the way that development unfolds within each individual. In early childhood, there's a major interplay between being dependent, and being independent. And that is going on all through childhood. So at every stage of development, children are always sort of struggling with that I do feel dependent on mom and dad, but I also want my freedom. And you see that in toddlers who will run down the street but then cry because they don't have mom around. And you'll see that in school-age children really wanting to be with their friends, but also really needing the security of mom and dad at home. And then in teenagers who are really striving for that independence, still need to know that they have and can rely on their parents for when they need them. Young children are really growing and functioning primarily out of that middle part of the brain, so we can expect a lot of emotions. And here's the thing, when we know that's occurring, we don't have to feel quite so frustrated about it when it occurs, because we know it's natural, we expect it to happen, and we're going to just give them as much support as they need. It's important to realize that the seed of learning occurs in the emotional center of the brain. So if a child is stressed, they're not going to be able to learn. If they're calm, they will be able to learn. So it's very, very important that we regulate ourselves to be in that perfect place when we want to be, when we're in a learning environment. So if your children are in school, you want them to be alert, but you don't want them to be stressed out, and you also don't want them to be sleeping. So it is acquiring just that right level of alertness that we're looking for, and that is a function of our emotional center. And then there's puberty with all of its complex factors of development, that struggle for autonomy, huge need to be separate and making your own choices and independent. But actually that's a need that every human being has from birth on. Underlying development and underlying the behavior that we see are basic human needs which drive all of the behavior, every bit of it. We're always, every minute of every day, striving to just meet our very basic human needs. And we all have the same ones. And they're the same at every age. So at every age, we have needs for autonomy, we have needs for connection, we have needs for independence, we have needs for support, we have needs for kindness and caring. Every human being has these same basic needs. Now, strategies to meet them will be different at different ages, but the need itself is the same from birth on. And in children, their primary needs, we call them the 5 A's. There's autonomy, affection, acceptance, appreciation, and attention. And if you think about your children, oh my gosh, aren't they always striving for attention? And they're also striving for autonomy, to be able to make their own choices. And they love when they receive the acceptance and affection that they're just so wanting. So when we know that these are the needs that drive our children's behavior, we can then be more effective in actually meeting those needs. This is Shoshana Wheeler. Thank you so much for joining me for this parenting segment on ProfessorIt.com.